Hi guys, hold on for a second. Before we proceed to the video, I have something very important to tell you. Professor Jon V. Kofas has published his new book in collaboration with Little French Media, and the title of the book is Neoliberalism, Inequality, and Authoritarianism. This book details how neoliberalism impacts the geopolitical economy in the 21st century. You can buy it from Amazon, and the link is in the description. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the video.
Hello guys, how are you? It's great to see you after so many days. I don't appear very often because there are more qualified people than me who can speak better on these topics. But today it is a very special occasion and it required me to be here because I wanted to share a very interesting story of how we started this channel, the People's Discourse. Uh, actually, we all know in 2023, the war began in the Gaza Strip between Israel and Hamas, and we all witnessed how it brought devastation to the population of the Gaza Strip. So far, we know that more than uh, 45,000 people have been killed in that war, and according to some reports, this number may have been doubled. I used to run a YouTube channel, which still is my original channel, uh, but it was in my local language, and the audience was local, the guests were local. So I used to invite them, and they used to share their opinions on this crisis, the Gaza crisis. Uh, I started noticing on social media that there were a lot of people who were advocating for the crisis in the Gaza Strip. They were regularly sharing their posts regarding you know, what people consider a genocide in Gaza Strip. And so I started inviting people. I met a lady, and I invited her to come to my YouTube channel as a guest and share her opinions on this topic. But she refused because she was not an expert on that topic. She did not have much to speak about, or she did not have any expertise that she could contribute to it or come on screen. But she gave me the link of a post, and she said that I may find some people on that post who may be relevant to this, and they may have some information, they may contribute to it. I don't exactly remember what the post was, but I do remember that it was something related to, that war. The war was very significant those days. It still is trending, even though we have had some significant events over the past year, like the Lebanon issue, the regime change in Bangladesh, and then we had, uh, you know, the Syrian civil war, the change of the government in Syria, the fall of Al-Assad regime, and then Donald Trump's uh, pursuit or his desires of, you know, uh, occupying the Greenland and Panama Canal, and then his desire of annexing Canada as the 51st state of the United States. But that doesn't mean that the world has forgotten about the Gaza crisis. The people still are connected to it, and people still wish that there is a ceasefire, and uh, we can have some better conditions for the citizens of the Gaza Strip. Now, uh, it also doesn't mean that we do not wish for uh, the other affected civilians. We do wish that there is peace in Ukraine. We do wish that there is peace in the other countries in the Middle East. We do wish that there is peace everywhere in the world. So let's get back to the topic. I opened that social media post which that lady shared with me, and I found the comment of the Professor Kofas there. So I texted Professor John V. Kofas. I contacted him and I invited him to be my guest, and I'm extremely thankful to him. He was kind enough, he was so polite, he was so kind. He didn't know me, and I didn't know him. We both were strangers, but he was kind enough. He trusted me, he believed in me, and he gave me the opportunity uh, to interview him. He accepted my offer. He immediately accepted my offer. He didn't, once he read my message, he was quick enough to respond, and he was all right. He was okay. He said, yes, whatever time we schedule, we will do that interview. And then we had that interview on the Israel Hamas war. It was on 2nd of January 2024. It's been a year since then. And so we had that interview, and then Professor John B. Kofas contacted me after a few days. He said that he shared that interview with his, uh, connections, people, and they all liked it. And then we started doing live streams on different topics. He has an interest in neoliberalism, so we started discussing neoliberalism, and then we would discuss so many other topics as well. We would also discuss trending topics in geopolitics. So it became a great association. I learned a lot from him during the past 1 year, and there were so many topics. And I think during the span of 7 to 8 months, we discussed, I think 20 or 30 uh, topics. I mean, maybe 30 videos during that 7 to 8 month span. And then finally, in during the month of August, just about 5 months back, I decided to create a separate channel for these videos, because my original channel had so different kind of content. There were The content was published in different languages, so it was like a cluster of content, and it was difficult to reach a target audience. It was difficult to reach a quality audience. So I decided to create a new channel back in August, 5 months ago. So it was this channel, the People's Discourse, and so I shifted all of the content, all of those conversations which I had with Professor John V. Kofos over the past 7 to 8 months. We shifted all of the content from that my original channel to this channel, the People's Discourse. Now you don't see those videos on that channel. You see all of those conversations on this channel, the People's Discourse. I would like to express my gratitude uh, for Professor John V. Kofos for being so kind, so helpful, and supporting me, helping me, teaching me, guiding me. He has been a friend like mentor to me. And now, without further ado, I'm inviting Professor John V. Kofos to comment on this. And after that, we will review the significant global events in 2024.
Thank you very
How are you,
much,
sir?
Assad. I am very grateful to you for extending the invitation 1 year ago. I wish it were under better circumstances. Unfortunately, it pertained to the genocide in Gaza. Ever since then, we have indeed, as you pointed out, analyzed many topics from the Middle East crisis to obviously the war in Ukraine, to everything from various aspects of neoliberalism, as well as issues that have to do with philosophical matters throughout this course. So I'm very grateful to you. A year later, unfortunately, we still have the ongoing war in Gaza, in spite of distractions that uh, the Israeli government has engaged in, and in spite of destabilization of the Middle East as a result of both the Israeli government but also regional players as well as international global players, the superpowers. The war in Ukraine is also ongoing. What we could do today, of course, is do an overview, and I would like to start by saying that what happened in 2024 with especially the genocide in Gaza, which you're correct with regard to the facts of fatalities, because today there was a publication in England that an independent organization came out with figures that the actual number of deaths is probably double what has been reported. And unfortunately, somewhere between 60 and 65% are children and women. So, and by the way, there are individuals and organizations who maintain that even that figure may be very low, that the figure may be a lot higher. We will not know until at some point in the future. I want to start with a general comment. Uh, to me, as a historian who looks at civilization from a broader perspective, what happened specifically in Gaza? Um, Not that the Ukraine war is to be dismissed or to be minimized, but what happened this year in Gaza, this last year in Gaza? What decision was rendered by both the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, as well as independent human rights organizations, as well as United Nations rapporteurs and various United Nations agencies? What happened there is a crime that all of us should be concerned about because it is a reflection on humanity and on civilization. This is not just about the Palestinians in Gaza. This is a reflection on humanity. This is retrogression. This is regression. This is going back to barbarian times in the 21st century. To have something of this magnitude take place, to have it videotaped, to have photographs, to have it so well documented that it is incontrovertible to question. There is no question about it, no matter what the government in Tel Aviv says, no matter what claims are made by Western media that it's terrorists in Gaza who are responsible for everything. The fact is that this war is an indictment on Western civilization. So I want to start with that because this war should have been stopped. There have been numerous hearings in court and in the United Nations, and numerous studies which indicate beyond any doubt that this is genocide and there are war crimes that have been committed, and yet as one after the other, um, various ambassadors in the UN representing different governments, with the exception of very few countries led by the United States and Israel, the rest of the world agrees there is unanimity that this war taking place, this genocide taking place in Gaza, is a reflection on all of humanity and on civilization. And there is no honor in claiming that Western democracies are fighting terrorism because the so called Western democracies are engaged, have been engaged as supporters, collaborators, cheerleaders, and protectors of a state that should have been stopped from going on with this war very early on, and yet to this day, it is allowed to be doing what it's doing in the name of uh, self defense, when in fact it is on the offensive, killing innocent civilians in Gaza, as well, by the way, as in the West Bank. So I see this not merely as an issue for the Zionist state, for Israel, but I see it as an issue for all of humanity, which is represented. Obviously, we have governments. The state represents each country, and the state, unfortunately, uh, collectively, all states are represented in the United Nations, and the United Nations Security Council and General Assembly have failed to stop this, the atrocities, this genocide war. So that is the first thing, the first comment that I want to make about what happened in 2024. And here we are, January 2025, and Israel is not letting up. There may be a ceasefire, they may not be, I don't know. They are obviously negotiating. However, they have been negotiating and negotiating ad nauseum. And here, this war is continuing. And as we speak, Israel has opened new fronts all along. It, by the way, engaged beyond Gaza and the West Bank. It engaged, it invaded Lebanon and visited mass destruction in Lebanon, in a country already suffering immensely because of economic dislocation. Here's a country, Lebanon, suffering enormous problems. And the Israelis were allowed to go in, and in using the pretext that Hezbollah, which is indeed supported by Iran, which indeed supports the Palestinian people, which indeed is against Israel in its execution of this war. Hezbollah was in support of the Palestinian people when no Arab country, no Muslim country, with the exception of Yemen, of the Houthi rebels in Yemen, also pro Iranian, and Iran itself, the rest of the Islamic world, when it came to doing something about putting pressure on Israel in 2024, this whole year that passed, such as cutting off commercial ties, cutting off diplomatic ties, just severing relations until Israel came to the negotiating table to negotiate a ceasefire and a diplomatic solution to the Palestinian question. They did not do that. The world was waiting to see what Islamic states would do, not what they said. Erdogan of Turkey said a lot of things, very heated rhetoric. Uh, all governments from Egypt to the Gulf states to Jordan, all governments said a lot of things. But what did they actually do to make it very difficult for Israel to continue with this war? They did not do very much at all. And that is another tragedy. And when the Europeans look at that, and when the rest of the world looks at that, and when it takes a country like South Africa to bring the case of genocide before the ICC, the International Criminal Court, uh, that is in itself, although South Africa, of course, and rightly so, has its own legacy of apartheid before the release of Nelson Mandela from prison, and it was honorable on their part to do this. The fact is, there should have been Islamic states in the forefront fighting this battle. So this war revealed a great deal about the hypocrisy of many of the states in the region that should have been on the side of the Palestinian people. After all, this was not a conventional war. This is not like the war between Russia and Ukraine, which Ukraine behind it is NATO. That's a conventional war, conventional forces going at each other. This is a war of a conventional power with nuclear weapons, by the way, latest weapons received from the Western countries, primarily the United States, using them against civilians in Gaza. That created a condition of genocide, and in the process, as the both courts, the ICC and the ICJ, have concluded, we have seen war crimes, killing, bombing of hospitals, schools, bombing of refugee camps, bombing of United Nations um, facilities, killing reporters, killing doctors, killing intellectuals, artists. This is all a reflection. I underscore a reflection on how decadent Western civilization has become. This is one of the um, top, I would say, stories of 2024, without a doubt. Not to mention, by the way, the repercussions that this war had, considering that it took place against the background of the other one in Ukraine, in driving up inflation, because the fact is, since the COVID-19 epidemic, we have had inflationary pressures, pricing pressures. Prices have gone up since 2020. Then the Ukraine war breaks out. It's now close to 1,000 days or so, and there's more inflationary pressure. And then this war comes along and it adds. So the global repercussions to putting uh, pressure on inflation has been felt across the world, by the way. So this is another derivative effect of this war. And that the failure to stop it has obviously burdened um, the entire planet. The next issue, I think, that's very important here is the issue of the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine very different than the war in the Middle East. Although the war in the Middle East, Israel, and to some degree the United States, did their very best to implicate Iran, to agitate Iran, to try to hit Iran, to get them engaged so they can argue that this was a conventional war if Iran becomes fully engaged. They expanded into Lebanon. That turned out to be a complete disaster, by the way. All they did is cause enormous damage in Lebanon. But still, the war in Gaza continued. And then, of course, from behind the scenes, they engaged Syria, as we will see. The war in Ukraine is very different in the sense that it was conventional from the very beginning and it remained conventional. Russia, it's very simple. It's not that difficult, really. Russia, ever since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, ever since 1991, Russia understood Gorbachev as um, yeah, both Mikhail Gorbachev as well as Boris Yeltsin, who succeeded him in the 1990s, both understood that NATO would not be expanding eastward and threatening and destabilizing the Russian Federation, the newly created Russian Federation, as well as its allies from the Transcaucasus region, that is Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and then beyond that into Central Asia, into such countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, those countries in Central Asia. And yet NATO um, did just that. NATO began to expand, unlike the Warsaw Pact, which was the counterpart to NATO, uh, established in 1955 by the Soviet Union with its allies, but dissolved. There was no reason for the Warsaw Pact because there was no communist bloc after 1990. NATO did the exact opposite. Instead of dissolving, since there was no Warsaw Pact, it it continued to gain more and more members in in Eastern Europe from the membership of former Soviet republics. There was a point where the Russians came to the realization that what was happening was that NATO was surrounding them. This goes back to 19th century diplomacy when Otto von Bismarck was Chancellor of Germany in the late 19th century, and he felt that it was called policy of encirclement. He felt that the French and the British were encircling Germany, and so Germany, especially after Bismarck was out of office, began to militarize very heavily, and of course Germany became aggressive and was the country that instigated and started World War One because it was pressured to the degree that it was because it felt encircled. In the 21st century, we have a policy of encirclement and containment, which are old policies, by the way, European policies tested in the 19th century and revived during the early Cold War. Here we are in the 21st century, in the new Cold War, with NATO knocking on the doorstep of the Russian Federation. And the Russian Federation reacted by invading its neighbor Ukraine, which doesn't have nuclear weapons. Russia, by the way, just for the record, has more nuclear warheads than any country in the world. The US is second. So the issue for Russia was a NATO-free neighbor, Ukraine, and that NATO stop expanding eastward toward the Black Sea, into Transcaucasus region, and into Central Asia, which, of course, the goal there was to contain simultaneously Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China. Uh, China obviously wasn't interested in having any of that, and immediately sided with Russia, um, realigned its strategic relationship with Russia in 2024, realigned its commercial relationship, signing long-term contracts for um, mineral exports from Russia to China, making sure that the Russian economy is sustained against the sanctions that the US and its allies had put on Russia. There was a diplomatic solution. There still is a diplomatic solution. Just today, the spokesman, I believe Peskov, for Vladimir Putin stated that, for the first time, by the way, that the Kremlin is open to a diplomatic solution, discussions, direct discussions, once the diplomatic um setting is established, with the new incoming president in the United States, so that the that war ends. The Kremlin, for the first time, agreed to sit down with its counterpart in the U.S. to resolve this conflict without preconditions. In other words, there is nothing on the table that prevents either side from bringing up anything at the negotiating table, but there are no preconditions going into the diplomatic talks. We haven't heard from, obviously, Trump is not, it will not be president until January 20th. And so we will see what happens. But this is the other conflict that has has had a serious destabilizing impact on the entire world, on energy prices, and especially in and energy, by the way, impacting the rest of the economy, spiraling up inflation, and especially Europe, by the way. Europeans, many Europeans have argued that they are the ones paying the price for their governments catering to US foreign policy under Joe Biden in 2022, 23, 24. Like I said, it's close to 1,000 days now, um, to go along and to engage Russia toward the military solution. The question has always been, is there a military solution to the war between Ukraine and Russia, considering that Russia has the leverage of more than 5,500 nuclear warheads? This is the reason there has been so much press on the possibility of nuclear war, because the question is, how far back do you push Russia, the Kremlin, before the so-called bluffs that the West said, well, Putin is bluffing. He's not going to use nuclear weapons. And China has, by the way, made its position clear. It doesn't want Russia to use nuclear weapons. It's not in the interest of China to do that, to have Russia use nuclear weapons. But the question is, how far does NATO, headed by the US, want to push Russia with its back to the wall, to the degree that, out of desperation, out of accident, whatever, it they someone in the Kremlin pushes the button on the orders of Putin, of course. That's the other issue that remains unresolved. I am more optimistic about this issue becoming resolved, and putting an end to it, than I am about a settlement for the Palestinians, who have no leverage. Unfortunately, the Palestinians, like the Kurdish minority in Turkey, in Syria, in Iraq, and Iran, have no leverage. Um, In this case, where there are two conventional powers, I'm more optimistic because both sides have leverage that there will be some common ground to find a resolution. The proposal of the West, namely, let's just put a moratorium on Ukraine not joining NATO now, but at some point in the future joining, has not been acceptable to Putin and to the Kremlin. But the fact is that uh, the there is room for negotiation. Everything is negotiable, and I think China has made it very clear that it's there to um, uh, to do what it can for both sides because it's in China's interest to have stability. Destabilization in the Middle East, destabilization in Eastern Europe is not in the interest of China, whose goal is global economic integration, not using the military as leverage to gain global market share, and and using sanctions and tariffs and um, using weaponizing the hard currency, namely the dollar, and so forth. China does not operate this way. China's role pattern of behavior has been well established for the last 30 years. We know it's predictable. We know what it wants in both the Middle East. Xi Jinping, the president of China, has made it very clear that it wants stability because stability will be of mutual benefit to all the parties involved into the world. The next issue that brought instability, and it was a source of instability, because, again, not just because it had an authoritarian regime under President Assad, who inherited his job, his position from his father in Syria, but there were actors in Syria ever since 2011 who were supported by um, states covertly, namely Turkey, which got its support from Qatar and Saudi Arabia and some of the Gulf states, destabilizing Syria because the United States and Israel made no secret that they wanted regime change in Syria. This was a major development. What happened in Syria in December of 2024 was a major development in the Middle East. All along, by the way, once in a while, the Israel and even the U.S. would drop bombs in certain targets in Syria, hitting Iranian positions. It is true that Iran was supportive, had been supportive of the al-Assad regime. It is true that Russia had been supportive of the regime. The fact is, the United States under Trump in 2019 decided that it had seen enough. Turkey had sided with Iran and Russia because Turkey's goal in Syria was to secure pipelines, gas and oil pipelines going through Turkey, and to using Syria as a distribution point so that Turkey could position itself as the preeminent energy distributor of the Near East. Turkey was a major player throughout the civil war, played both sides, by the way, initially with Saudi Arabia, the United States, Qatar, then with Russia and Iran, and of course, more recently, um, after he tried, by the way, Turkey did try, Erdogan did try to have Assad agree to provide to the pipelines and to provide the reconstruction contracts, which amount to a great deal of money, um, anywhere in the neighborhood from 300 to 600 billion for the reconstruction of Syria. A country, by the way, completely devastated after more than a decade of civil war by a number of groups within Syria, which were jihadists. They were Al Qaeda based, just like Hayat Tahrir al Sham, which is the HTS government Bajulani right now. That was linked to Al Qaeda. ISIS was not, but ISIS also a jihadist group, initially receiving support, indirect support from the Gulf states to destabilize both of them, to destabilize the Al Assad regime. Um, this is not to argue that Al Assad was some kind of a hero. He was an authoritarian, he was repressive, he had put a lot of political opponents in prison. Uh, there is ample evidence of that. Syria, however, suffered destabilization because of regime change operations on the part of Gulf states supported by Israel, Turkey, and the United States because they wanted a regime that is anti Iranian, anti Russia, and pro Gulf states, pro Israel, pro West, which is what they seem to have gotten right now, except that this regime seems to be veering off toward a course that the West, clearly Israel doesn't like it because he has said so, but the United States and Europe are also, less Europe, more the United States, are also reconsidering their position because they are concerned this regime may be going the route of a hardline Islamist state. That remains to be seen where they're going with policies. Syria, make no mistake about it, has not been a case of a Middle Eastern country that was under authoritarian rule, the Assad father and son since 1970, from 1970 to 2024, and to be replaced with some freedom-loving democratic regime, pluralistic and so forth. That is not the case. The case here is about Turkey wanting a hegemonic role in Syria and continuing to agitate and to carry out combat in the northeast where the Kurdish minorities are, both in Kurdish minorities of Turkey as well as the Syrian. The Kurds number 35 to 45, 30 to 45 million throughout this region. In other words, from Turkey, most of the Kurds are in Turkey, but they're also in Syria, Iraq, Iran, some in Armenia, there's some in Lebanon. Um, Turkey has used the issue of Kurdish terrorism, although the Kurds, by the way, had been the ones who were fighting against ISIS and against Al Qaeda linked groups. Okay, Turkey has used that issue to have a foothold and to play a role in determining the future of Syria. And now it's in a very good strategic position. Israel was also hoping to do the same thing, and just yesterday it was revealed by the Israeli press that the government of Israel, is interested in carving up Syria into spheres of influence. Just like in the 19th century, Western governments did in the global South. They would carve up, just like the Sykes-Picot Agreement, of course, carved up the map of the Middle East the French and the British determined the map of the Middle East, not the people of the Middle East, but the France and England in 1916. So spheres of influence in China, for example, after the Boxers' War of 19 excuse me, of 1900, 1901, spheres of influence dividing China into territories uh, that where the great powers had dominant influence, from Russia to Japan to Germany to France to England. This is 19th century imperialist thinking. So here is Israel and Turkey playing that exact same game in Syria to determine the balance of power in the Middle East, using Syria to do it, depriving Syria of its sovereignty, regardless of the rhetoric that we hear from the Western media that at last al-Assad is gone, he's off to Moscow, and Syria can have national sovereignty. Well, it does not, because there are two countries there, the neighboring countries, um, Israel in the south by the Golan Heights, and Turkey in the northeast, where there's a concentration of Kurdish population, both interested in determining the fate of Syria and carving up Syria. And another very good development, a very interesting development in 2024 was the victory of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, unfortunately, has made headlines in world affairs just very recently by stating he wants Canada to be the 51st state of the U.S. And why not? Canada is English speaking. It's predominantly Anglo-Saxon. Okay, so it's a sovereign state, but the U.S. can use it. It has other problems. It can't possibly compete with China at the economic level, and it's very difficult to see how it can possibly make headway with China uh, spending uh, trillions in defense. Already, the U.S. budget for next year is going to be close. Military budget is going to be close to $1 trillion. It's spending more money on defense than the next 10 or 11 countries combined, and yet it argues that it wants to expand in a very bold imperialist terms, not just make Canada the 51st state, but retake the Panama Canal, take Greenland, by the way, and perhaps have some plans for Mexico as well, neighboring Mexico. This is the sort of blatant annexationist, blatant imperialist talk that one um, could hear in the late 19th, early 20th century. Just for the record, by the way, the Panama Canal was built by the United States, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It was built by the United States. However, there was no Panama before the Spanish-American War of 1898. The U.S. had Panamanian rebels who were under U.S. Um, control rebel against the government of Colombia. Panama was a province of Colombia. There was no such thing as Panama. The U.S. created the nation of Panama, in a typical imperialist fashion, just like the Sykes-Picot Agreement drew up the map of the Middle East. The U.S. created a new country in South America, taking Panama from Colombia and then building the canal to accommodate its shipping interests. There was 100-year lease agreement. It was up. Jimmy Carter signed the signed the agreement to give Panama back to the government of Panama. That is who controls the Panama Canal, not China, by the way. China has an agreement with Peru to build a major port in Peru to accommodate I'm sorry, China Latin American interests, which U.S. Latin American interests would be impacted by this because China is making enormous headway in commercial relations between Latin America and China. So the only reason to control the Panama Canal would be to have leverage over Chinese shipping interests, namely COSCO, which is the largest shipping company in the world. It's Chinese, obviously. And China has the largest um, uh, shipping containers by tonnage. In other words, the most interest in uh, shipping than any other country. It exceeds any other country in the world. The U.S. knows this. They want strategically to control the Panama Canal because it offers leverage. And that's what that is. It's nothing more than that. However, Greenland is more than that. Greenland is not only of geopolitical interest to the U.S., it's also a country that has rare earth minerals. And those of you who may know about those, about rare earth elements, they're used in high tech, they're used in pharmaceuticals, they're used in defense. And if you know that much, you probably know that most of them are produced in China. China controls most of the world's rare earth minerals, and it can use them and has used them, by the way, has used them as leverage. When the US talks about tariffs, sanctions, and so forth, they do go back to their rare earth minerals. Greenland has a number of them. It doesn't have many, but it does have a number of them. And the US is interested. Quietly, without making headlines, the Biden administration stopped a company operating rare earth minerals in Greenland with the cooperation of Denmark, which, of course, Denmark is in charge and is not interested in of Greenland. Is not interested in selling Greenland to the United States. Um, and the Biden administration stopped the company, which needed cash. By the way, it was looking for cash, and the Chinese company moved forward and said, "Well, let's negotiate a deal here." The U.S. and Denmark together stopped the Chinese company and gave the company in Greenland, the mineral company in Greenland, a lot less than they were asking for in comparison with what the Chinese were offering. Now here comes Trump, and he wants the entire island, which is the largest island, by the way, in the world. He wants the entire island of Greenland for both geopolitical, that is strategic reasons, as climate change is melting the ice um, in the northern part of, or in the central northern part of Greenland, but also to make use of the rare earth elements. The Trump victory, by the way, is also very important because it sent a signal to the world that the United States, um, under the guise of electoral politics, is determined to pursue aggressive policies, especially economic warfare, as Trump announced immediately as soon as he was elected. He hasn't taken office, but he announced he will impose sanctions, he will impose tariffs, punitive tariffs, not only against China, but neighboring Mexico and Canada, as well as Europe. And he will resort to the same sort of tactics which some scholars, in writing articles about this in the last 10 years, not quite 10 years, the last 8 years, have argued amounted to extortion when he demanded that NATO countries buy American military hardware and raise the percentage of GDP they were spending on defense and accommodate American defense corporations. Um, he's going to continue along those lines. So the Trump victory was a signal that the America First principle applies, and that the United States was not going to pursue um, a policy of multilateral engagement through the United Nations and any kind of consensus through the United Nations where there is conflict to be resolved. It's going to go at it alone. Trump is a well known unilateralist and isolationist, by the way. And so that is also something that it was very important with his electoral victory, along with the fact that he encouraged right wing political parties all over the world. Just one point I want to make, and then I'll move on to some other issues. His number one contributor, Elon Musk, the uh, richest man in the world, um, has made no apologies about supporting neo-Nazi parties, neo-fascist, neo-Nazi, far right-wing. They may call themselves whatever they like, but scholars who do more objective analysis of these parties find many neo-Nazi elements in their ideology and in the policy proposals. And one of those political parties that Trump's billionaire donor has been courting is the German Alternative for Deutschland, which is the far right political party in that country, and whose leader, by the way, happens to be a member of a society of neoliberals, um, and a big supporter of Trump, who is also a neoliberal, by the way. And neoliberalism can operate under a pluralistic government, or it can operate under an authoritarian one. And as it is becoming very difficult to impose neoliberal policies, in other words, to raise the taxes on the working class and the middle class, and lower the taxes on the rich, to provide corporate subsidies and cut social welfare programs, um, to raise the retirement age, to attack collective bargaining, to attack trade unions, to deregulate the economy so that we move toward more monopoly capitalist model of economic scene here. What we have is an economy, a world economy, which is increasingly moving toward monopoly capitalism, like in the late 19th century when there were cartels and monopolies. We have, because of deregulation, make no mistake about it, deregulation means emboldening monopoly capitalism. So more and more companies that are that have market capitalization in the trillions, by the way, in the trillions, whether it's Apple or Amazon, large companies, Nvidia, these companies have market capitalization in trillions. These are giant companies. Even if there are smaller companies that compete with them, there's really no competition for them. It's so inconsequential. It's not that important to them at all. So this is obviously the more accurate word would be oligopoly, which is another like monopoly, another classical Greek word, which means um, the market of the few. Rather, monopoly is the market of one. So the so this is the situation we're moving to under authoritarian neoliberalism, and Trump is in that camp along with a number of others, from Modi in India to Orban in Hungary, um, to Meloni in Italy, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, who recently visited, by the way, with Trump. So we have this expansion of neoliberal authoritarianism in 2024, and Trump's victory was an indication of this. Let me go to a couple of other uh, issues because I see we're up on the hour and I don't want to take a lot more time. But one of the tragic consequences, I would be remiss if I did not mention this, that happened because of the two wars in Ukraine and Gaza, the genocide in Gaza and the conventional war in Ukraine, is that fossil fuel dependence on a world scale um, made a return, made a comeback, and green energy, um, uh, the fact is that the alternatives to fossil fuels um, um, took a back seat in a year, 2024, when scientists maintain could have been the warmest year on record. Um, some disputed, but there are other scientists who argue that climate change is here to stay. Even just the last few days, including today, there were some scientists who argued what is happening, the fires in California, that too is part of climate change. So there is evident what's happening with the melting of the ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic, including Greenland, which I mentioned already. That's part of climate change. Now, there is a direct correlation between these wars and the green economy, and alternative forms of energy to fossil fuels, because spending um, and subsidies, by the way, government subsidies to corporations, including by Biden, who, by the way, claimed that he was not like Trump, falling all over himself to support the old energy, the fossil fuel energy sectors. The fact is, he did just as much for them, even more than Trump did, precisely because he engaged in these two proxy wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine. The other issue, of course, is because China has made such a huge um, uh, step forward with regard to solar panels and with electric cars. Some of the Western countries all of a sudden became skeptical because of the anti China syndrome that we have during this new Cold War, saying, well, really, if we support the new forms of energy, that means we're really strengthening China, aren't we? And we don't want to do that. And in fact, they don't. There are all kinds of measures to make sure that the Chinese don't flood the Western markets with their electric cars. So climate change suffered in the climate change technology and investment and progress in that field, climate change, not the climate change, some climate change promotion, I should say, of industries to do something about climate change suffered in 2024 because of the combination of the two wars, Ukraine and Gaza, as well as the new Cold War against China, which is at the economic level. The last thing I'm going to mention is has to do with the enormous concentration of wealth, which became even more concentrated in 2024, and the facade of democracy behind which rests, unfortunately, authoritarianism. Um, Let me look at the figure here. It has been reported that there are 2,153 billionaires on this planet, and these people, a couple of thousand of them, own more wealth than 60% of the planet's population. The planet's population is 8 billion, by the way, in total. 2,153 billionaires own more wealth than these people, which is indicative of how neoliberal policies lead to capital concentration. And indeed, this comes at a time when Western governments, including, by the way, the United States, which has the world's largest GDP in nominal value, not in purchasing power parity, the United States has the world's largest GDP. The United States claims to be the world's leading democracy, a model democracy for the global South, and yet one person, the world's richest man, Elon Musk, provided 300 million, an estimated 300 million, according to press reports, to elect Trump. And we have on record billionaires basically electing public officials, not just in the United States, on a world scale. So this is not democracy. This is plutocracy. 2024 was another year which witnessed the rise of plutocracy. It's a Greek word, it's an ancient Greek word, which means ruled by the rich. The eminent MIT scholar Noam Chomsky has done a study called Who Rules the World? And you can guess what the answer is that Chomsky provides. It is these people, and the state is in their hands. The people who are carrying out public policy are carrying out public policy with a facade of democracy, but to benefit the privileged elites. And the only reason we have 2,153 people who own more wealth than 60% of the planet's population is precisely because billionaires and multimillionaires are financing the campaigns, providing the funding to put these people in office, and that is not democracy. The word democracy is classical Greek, and it means ruled by the people uh, for their interests, not for the interests of the socioeconomic elites. So 2024, in summary, and I see we're about 10 minutes, 1 hour and 10 minutes into this session. 2024, what we have seen on this planet is warfare, capital concentration, destabilization, rising socioeconomic inequality, and a move to the far right um, beginning with all countries of the United States, which elected Trump because the American people, as Senator Bernie Sanders correctly pointed out, were fed up with a Democratic Party pretending to be on the side of the working class and the middle class, when in fact it was on the side of Wall Street and the military industrial complex. So Senator Sanders was right when he stated that the Democratic Party abandoned the working class voter and the middle class voter. So the middle class voter and the working class voter, of course, either stayed home or and a few went the other way and voted for Trump. So what we have is, and this, by the way, this situation is not just limited to the U.S. This is on a world scale. The liberal political parties have moved in the last 40 to 50 years to the right. And the conservative, the traditional conservative parties, including the Republican Party in the United States, have moved to the far right. So what we have is a facade of democracy behind electoral politics, but in reality, authoritarianism. I want to thank you for listening, for tuning in. Please write comments. Please join this channel. Assad Alim, my very good friend, is doing an excellent job providing um, educational programming, and I would ask you to support him and become subscribers. Thank you very much.